The modern global economy is a constructed machine. It was built with a specific purpose: to centralize financial power into a single currency. In July 1944, representatives from 44 countries gathered in a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their objective was to design the financial system that would govern the post-war world. John Maynard Keynes arrived at that meeting with a proposal. He wanted to create a neutral global currency called the Bancor, a system governed by international rules where no single nation controlled the printing press. The United States rejected the proposal. Holding approximately 2/3 of the world's gold at the end of the war, America used its leverage to ensure the U.S. dollar became the sole global reserve currency, pegged directly to gold at $35 an ounce. For 80 years, that framework held. The dollar was the structural center of global trade. Countries held dollars because there was no serious alternative, establishing an automatic trust that the entire world relied upon to do business. The 1944 blueprint was designed for an era of total American dominance. But in the last 20 years, the core metrics that define that architecture have shown a massive structural shift that hasn't been seen in 80 years. In 2001, the dollar comprised 73% of global reserves. By Q3 2025, that number fell to 56.9%. Simultaneously, central banks are buying physical gold at the fastest rate since the 1960s, purchasing over 800 tons in 1 year. Central banks are prioritizing physical gold because it functions as a physical asset the United States Treasury cannot sanction or freeze. The world is diversifying its wealth because holding U.S. dollars is now perceived as a geopolitical liability. The automatic trust that sustained the 1944 design has begun to evaporate. The original Bretton Woods Agreement actually broke decades ago. On a Sunday evening in August 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television and suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Severed from gold, the dollar relied entirely on the credibility of the U.S. government. In 1973, that credibility faced a challenge when an OPEC embargo quadrupled oil prices, plunging the American economy into severe stagflation and creating mile-long lines at gas stations. In 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to the Saudi desert to negotiate a solution. America guaranteed Saudi Arabia's security and military protection. In exchange, the Saudis agreed to price all global oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. This chart shows the resulting cycle. Because every nation needed oil, every nation had to hold dollars to buy it. Saudi Arabia then took its surplus revenue and purchased American Treasury bonds, financing U.S. debt at favorable rates. This was the petrodollar system. It replaced gold with energy, creating an invisible foundation that secured the dollar's dominance for another half-century. That 50-year dominance fractured in February 2022. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States and its allies deployed their ultimate financial weapon. Western powers froze approximately $300 billion of Russian central bank assets. Decades of sovereign savings accumulated from oil revenues simply stopped being accessible. Central bankers outside the West watched this happen and drew an immediate conclusion. If America can freeze Russia's savings instantly, no sovereign wealth held in Western financial institutions is safe. Even America's military leadership warned of the fallout. General Mark Milley acknowledged that weaponizing the currency risked accelerating the move away from the dollar-based financial system. The asset freeze destroyed the dollar's illusion of political neutrality. It proved that any nation holding the currency is subject to American foreign policy decisions, turning an international reserve asset into an active threat. The global financial architecture is now dismantling under its own pressure. In June 2024, Saudi Arabia allowed the 50-year petrodollar agreement to quietly expire. The kingdom announced it is now willing to accept payment for oil in euros, yuan, or whatever currency a buyer holds. Alternative infrastructures are rapidly scaling up to process these trades. China's cross-border payment system, CIPS, is growing at 43% per year, while countries like Brazil and China establish direct currency swap arrangements. Today, the BRICS nations settle approximately 67% of trade between themselves in local currencies, deliberately bypassing the dollar framework entirely. There is no single dollar-killer currency that will take over tomorrow. Instead, the unified global system is permanently fracturing into a decentralized network of competing regional currencies. This unwinding has a direct impact on the everyday consumer. For decades, reserve currency status provided America with what the French called the exorbitant privilege, the ability to run massive deficits, finance hundreds of global military bases, and import cheap foreign goods. As global demand for the dollar drops, there are fewer buyers for U.S. debt. To attract capital, interest rates on the $36 trillion national debt must rise. That cost translates to higher domestic interest rates and more expensive imported goods, shifting an exorbitant financial burden onto ordinary citizens. History shows that every global reserve currency eventually falls. But while the handoff from the British pound in 1944 was a managed negotiation, this shift is occurring in a landscape of geopolitical competition rather than cooperation. This transition lacks the formal coordination of the past. 44 nations carefully built the system we rely on today. But as that framework collapses, there is no coordinated leadership managing the descent. The old financial order is being dismantled piece by piece, and right now nobody is in the room designing what comes next.